Welcome to King County Connects, where we connect you with some of the important issues in the county and in our region. I'm Enrique Cerna. King County has a new law enforcement watchdog with the authority to review the results of internal investigations. Deborah Jacobs, the newly appointed director of the county's Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, OLEO, is with us today to talk about her new position here, and she has actually come back home. You're a native of Ellensburg, but you've been out of the Northwest for a while. Most recent stop was in St. Louis, and also you were there during the time of Ferguson as well. Tell me a bit about that and what you might have learned from that experience.
Wow, well, I arrived in St. Louis a couple months after Michael Brown was shot, and I got involved with the Black Lives Matters movement. And because it's a Black Lives Matters movement, it's led by Black people, and I did my best to support the leadership. We did a lot of policy issues. We did a lobby day for the Missouri State Legislature, which is extremely conservative by Seattle standards. And we also did a lot of support for the protesters. We set up safe houses. We stocked them with refreshed clothing because people come in and they've been pepper sprayed, and the clothing has to be bagged and moved out, and new stuff given to them, hand warmers, all kinds of support to make that movement possible. And I'm really proud of that protester support, because the protesters are the reason we have a movement. They're the people putting their lives on the line to make change, and they're young people and they're courageous, and I was really proud to do everything I could to be a part of that effort. And it's ongoing, it's nationwide, and I think, it'll be great to interact with the Black Lives Matters movement here. And I know we have a strong African American community, small but mighty, and as well as so amazing immigrant communities that are also interested in these issues. So I'm really looking forward to getting out to the community here and meeting people and engaging and finding out what's on people's minds.
So your background, you have spent much time working with the ACLU.
Yes.
And taking on a number of challenges with them. You worked in New Jersey. In fact, it was the New Jersey Star-Ledger called you a pit bull who looked like a pixie or something like that. I can't remember the quote. So it's an interesting transition to go from working for the ACLU to now come into a position like this, where you're kind of overseeing internal investigations and looking at what law enforcement is doing here. How do you see mixing those two things?
It's a lot of overlap between what the ACLU does as advocates and what police oversight involves. So I'm really grateful to have had that experience and develop my skills and expertise in police practices. In New Jersey, I was especially active looking at the Newark Police and many other departments. I worked at the state, county, and local level in trying to improve policies and practices. And I'm especially proud that even though I was, in fact, a bit of a pit bull, I also had excellent relationships with law enforcement leadership, as I hope to here as well. We have a really strong progressive sheriff, and I'm excited about the potential not to uncover corruption or bad activities, although that might be a part of it, but also to do proactive, progressive, good, best practices initiatives along with the sheriffs, and see King County take the leadership nationwide as a strong department with good accountability and treating officers and citizens well alike.
What attracted you to this position? I know you had thoughts of going elsewhere, and Seattle might not have been at the top of the list, but this opportunity came up here in King County. And you go obviously from a position where you're generally on the other side with police, and now you're in a different role. Maybe not too much different, but now you're part of the government.
For me, having a background in a broad range of civil liberties issues, police practices really rises to the top because it's the most immediate, direct, and dangerous interaction between citizen and government. And because of that, it's also the gateway to mass incarceration, of course. So because of that, in terms of thinking about the big picture of civil liberties, I really focus on police practices because I feel the urgency of it. As far as coming to King County, first of all, what an amazing place to live. Although I love the East Coast, I love the Middle, I love the whole country, but this is obviously a special place. It's where my roots and my family are. But in addition, I was attracted to coming into a position where there is a culture of progressive thought about police practices, a strong sheriff who wants to be accountable and who's serious about his job. So again, what an amazing opportunity to really not just fight problems like I did in Newark, but advance good ideas and good practices.
The office has had some issues, some controversy in the past here. There was also actions by voters here that some feel that has given it a little bit more teeth. Had you looked into this and what had happened in the past and what you might need to do to strengthen the office?
Right. So the struggles the office has had were a plus and a minus to me as a candidate for the job. On the plus side, I was like, wow, I can really fix that up. And I really view it in my mind as a new position, as if it's never been done before. I'm not worried about the past. We're going to build from here and do things as best as I can. So I think that that part of it was especially attractive.
How do you see your role, I guess, out there in the community?
Right. So one thing is I would not have applied for the position if the voters had not passed the initiative, the strengthening of the charter amendment for this office to exist, because it had very limited authority or power before. It still has pretty limited authority or power, but one of the things that was added was the ability to investigate complaints on a discrete basis and get as much access to information. It strengthened our citizen advisory board that comes with the office. So all those things, the mandate of the voters, we want strong accountability systems. That told me that the community was really ready for this kind of office. I don't view the role as dramatically different from the ACLU. I'm still an advocate for the citizens. That's what I am here to do. However, this job also affords for more collaborative opportunities with the sheriff. So I see that as a plus. I can sort of play both sides. And just yesterday, I sent out an email to my King County colleagues highlighting a video of a King County Sheriff's Office officer doing an amazing job addressing a suspect with a weapon who would not comply with police orders. And that's a situation where you often see people end up shot, but instead the sheriff's officer used a taser and was able to disarm the person that way and possibly save his life. So I'm interested in highlighting the good as much as I am the bad, and I'd like to have a nice balance. I'm an advocate, but I'm also a collaborator.
That's interesting because it's like showing best practices.
Exactly, which is one of the great things about the age of video is you can see the warrior officer in action, but you can see the guardian as well. You can see the de-escalator, and there's nothing better than a de-escalator in policing.
Yeah, and I think actually with video and people having phones and all of these things, it's obviously had an impact on these issues. Absolutely. And how police and community relations. So using it in a different way, that's unique.
Yeah, and the other, I think, profound impact of all these videos is that people who are not the targets of police misconduct finally are starting to believe the people who have been for years and have been asking for help and asking for protection. And I think the general public's awareness about it has really come up.
Do you, will you be like getting out in the community, kind of community engagement, community efforts to let them know who you are, what the office is all about, what people might be able to do if they need some type of information or help or feel any confusion about a relationship with the police?
It's essential for the success of this office that we have a strong presence in the community, because King County oversees a certain number of cities that the Sheriff's Office has contracts with, plus unincorporated King County. There isn't really a high level of awareness of how to file complaints, that the office exists to come to with issues. So I think there's a lot of public education that we need to get done. And fortunately, we have a Citizens Advisory Committee that might be able to help us in some of that outreach, going to places where you'll find communities vulnerable to police misconduct, African American communities, immigrant communities, disability communities. There's a whole range of people who really need this outreach. So yes, we hope to have a presence in the community and raise awareness and make sure people know, because the idea behind this is trust between community and police, and we can help facilitate that trust if people know about us.
building trust too in communities of color, obviously there is still a great deal of mistrust of police. Sounds
Understandably so.
That you'll have your work cut out with there in trying to bridge that
Right.
gap.
Yes, although big picture wise, and this is really looking at, as a nation, what do we need to do to change police issues? We really need communities and police to look together at what police priorities should be and what's most important. Does a community want the police stopping a teenager who's walking in the middle of the road like Michael Brown? Is that how we want them to spend their time? If the answer is no, understand the cost to that. If the answer is yes, there are costs to that as well. So, Seattle was a groundbreaker when it years ago made marijuana the lowest law enforcement priority. What about more democratic process for priority setting for police? And the reason I say this is because when you have police enforcing sort of low-level crimes, you're catching a lot of kids and people don't like that. But on the other hand, when your window gets broken, you don't like that either. So it's really got to be an informed conversation. That's what'll create trust long term. And that's something I might look at my job sort of down the line. For now, I need to really think about the bread and butter, the issues that are coming to my office, the kinds of patterns that we might see. We're interested in, obviously, use of force things. Is the internal affairs system accessible to people? All those kind of questions. I want to get those building blocks in place and then think about what more can be done.
So you're really kind of looking at the system right now to see where you can make recommendations or
Right.
provide some bridge to the community and things?
The bread and butter of our job is to review the internal investigations that the sheriff's office conducts. But beyond that, we want to take deeper dives into certain areas and issues that come to our attention, including investigations when appropriate and reports and audits of different systems. So that'll be an important aspect of our growth.
Seattle has, its police department obviously has its challenges with being under a federal court order as well. Are you kind of looking at that and seeing what you might be able to learn so that overall in the King County area that you might be able to avoid any of the pitfalls that might have happened there?
Yeah, I'm wondering if Seattle's looking at King County and wondering what it can learn from our systems. But of course, I've been following Seattle. Seattle has a lot of oversight right now. There's different systems in place. I think at some point that'll be reduced. There are excellent people undertaking the oversight in Seattle and a lot of engaged citizens. So I'm hopeful for its future. It's a much more complicated demographic than King County. We're complicated, but the volume that they deal with is much higher. So I keep abreast of them. But I mentioned that video of a King County officer disarming a person without using a gun, using a taser instead. Well, there was just a shooting in the last week or two with Seattle police with a very similar situation that had a different outcome. So I think we really, as a region, need to look at how different departments are addressing issues and how they're training specifically so that, we can save lives.
You spent so many years with the ACLU.
Mm-hmm.
Building a reputation there and as a strong advocate and being forceful when you had to. Tell me about the decision to go for this job, because it obviously is different from what you have been doing.
Well, I did a couple things after I left the ACLU. I worked for the Ms. Foundation for Women on feminist issues like access to child care, which is probably one of the biggest issues for women. And then I went to St. Louis and did the Ferguson work. So part of doing the Ferguson work was really drilling down on what my passion is, which is changing the way criminal justice is implemented in this country. And, coming here, great place to live, great government agency to work for, lots of opportunity with a strong progressive sheriff. So, it all made sense to me as far as where to take my passions next. Yeah. That being said, I do a lot of volunteer. I have lots of interests. I'll be involved in different community activities here as well, and hopefully that'll be an asset to my job as I meet people from vulnerable communities who can relate to us on different issues when they encounter King County Sheriff's officers.
What kind of volunteer stuff are you doing?
So I'm very interested in the issue of sexual violation, and I have in the past been involved in coalitions against sexual assault, and I'll look to get involved here. I also serve as a volunteer director for an organization called the Ernest Becker Foundation, which deals with how awareness of our mortality affects our behavior, which is very profound. Just like Freud thought everything was about sex, Ernest Becker thought everything is about death. And there's been a lot of strong science to support that. And it comes to play into policing, into politics, into really every aspect of our lives. So that sort of sits with me as I do my job and helps me understand basically how fear makes us do things we wouldn't otherwise do.
How do you see yourself working, I guess, with the department and the frontline guys out there? Do they need to be worried about you, or are you looking to work and reach out so that you can build a bond or a relationship?
Well, I'm very fortunate because even before I got here, there were really good information sharing systems between offices. I'm able to sit on different meetings that the sheriff holds and have access to all the internal investigations files, which they hold, but we can take a look at. It's a little bit of a dance. You want to be collegial and share information and be helpful to one another, but you're also not buddies, So I'm going to see how that goes. I think that one thing that's important about this job to remember is that the sheriff is an elected position, and the head of an office sets the tone, sets the culture, helps set the policy and determine their actions. So right now, as I've mentioned, we have a strong progressive sheriff. I don't know who the next sheriff will be, and so it's an office that needs to always keep in mind that its first duty is advocacy of the citizens and the citizens' interests. So that's where my head and my heart are, and often you can get further with advancing your goals with a carrot than a stick, but I have both.
John Urquhart, obviously you are happy with what he is doing with the King County Police Department. Was that also an attraction for you to come here as far as trying to get this job?
Absolutely. Having someone good in place, it can be fun to have someone bad in place too if you like beating up on people, but really my priority is what's best for the citizens. And if having a great sheriff who is willing to try different things and approaches and is knowledgeable about nationwide best practices and wants to be the best department possible, that's a plus that we can build on. And like I said before, I would love to see us set some nationwide standards for best practices.
Is there a model elsewhere in the country for this office?
Sure, there's a million models. Citizen oversight takes all kinds of different forms. You can have citizen boards that decide things. You can have professional offices like this, or New York City has an inspector general. There's all kinds of models, and they're trying different things. Newark, where I spent a lot of my years fighting for better police practices, recently passed the first in the country, I think, citizen oversight board that actually has discipline authority over officers, and that's now been taken to court by the police union. I don't know the outcome, and that's not something I think we would need or want here, but it shows you the press of the people saying it's not enough, we want more, we're not seeing the results. And so I think we're going to see all kinds of developments in citizen oversight over the next 10 years, and I'm really proud to be involved with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOL, and I've been active in that several years. I'm in their certification program, and think it's a really positive thing that we can come together and talk about what's the best way to do things. Again, everyone's trying to get the right outcome. I think police and citizens alike want the same things, but it's such a complicated dynamic. It's a little bit hard to achieve, and that's why it requires the big picture rethinking in some ways. What's the right job description for a police officer?
A year from now, you just started.
Yeah.
You just got here. You're still just probably trying to figure out where the bathrooms are in this place. But where do you want to be in this position, as far as what would you like to accomplish?
So one of the key things I would like to accomplish is to have heightened awareness among the citizens that we're a resource to them, we're a safe place they can come, their complaints will be taken seriously, and we are absolutely 100% invested in the concerns of the citizens. I would also like to have a more developed program for doing reviews and audits because the office has been short-staffed and unstable. You know, we really haven't dug into some of the meat. I think as good as the sheriff is, there are lots of areas where we can suggest tweaks and improvements and systems that we can influence. Another thing is because this new charter amendment was just passed, it needs to be translated into ordinance and it needs to be negotiated. Parts of it need to be negotiated related to police collective bargaining. So that's going to be a bit of a project, and it's a building block that we need to get in place. So I hope within my first 6 months that's also done. And I would like to see, you know, a few policy changes. I'm not going to tell you what I have in mind, but I'm working towards some things that I think will be easy and agreeable fixes on things.
And the types of things that would make the community relationships better, or?
And the manner in which internal investigations and information flows. So I think there's a lot of room, and again, because we're lucky enough to have a good on-the-ball sheriff, it really gives the opportunity to take positive measures and move them forward.
All right. Glad to be back here. You're getting used to a life versus what the Midwest versus back here in the Northwest.
I'm getting used to walking up and down a lot of hills.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Deborah Jacobs, Director of King County's Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, OLEO as it's called. Thank you very much for your time. Maybe in about a year we'll come back here and talk about the progress that you have made and those policy things you didn't want to tell me about, but we can talk about that then. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Please visit us online at kingcounty.gov, KCTV. I'm Enrique Cerna, and we'll see you next time.